Section 10 of Tribal Custom and Anglo-Saxon Law. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Tribal Custom and Anglo-Saxon Law by Frederic Seebohm. Chapter 4, Tribal Custom of the Irish Tribes, Part 4. 6. The Breton or Gallic Virgald, of the so-called canons Vilici. It is perhaps possible, with help from another set of canons, to obtain further evidence of Celtic usage as to the fine for homicide, and what is still more to the point, to trace it back to the continental side of the Channel. At the end of the Latin version of the Dimension Code of South Wales are appended as part of Chapter 49 several clauses which do not belong to the code and are quite inconsistent with its provisions. These clauses are carelessly extracted, with variations, from a set of canons which, from their thus partly appearing at the end of the Latin version of the Dimension Code, have come to be known as the Canon Vilici. The oldest MS of this document is referred to the 8th century, and the canons themselves are referred by Hatton and Stubbs to the 7th century. It is not at all clear that, notwithstanding the name they have acquired, they are of Welsh origin. The intercourse between the missionary monks and churches of Brittany, Cornwall, Wales, and Ireland was so intimate that there is no difficulty in understanding how a Welsh scribe or copyist, falling upon these canons, should add extracts from them to a Latin copy he was making of the Dimension Code, whether of Welsh origin or not. Some of them have been used, amongst others, by the Church in South Wales. It may seem presumptuous to doubt their Welsh origin, after the opinion expressed both by Wessersleben and such competent authorities as Hatton and Stubbs, to whose labors the student is so greatly indebted. But that opinion is doubtfully expressed, and references made by them to the fact that 2 of the 3 MS described the collection of canons not as canons Vilici, but as excerpta de libris Romanorum et Francorum, and excerpta de libris Romanus et Francorum, while the 3rd of the 8th century does not seem to have any heading but incipit justicum coparum. Hatton and Stubbs assigned the origin of these canons to that period, c. A.D. 550 to 650, during which both the Welsh Church and the Welsh principalities appear to have become organized, i.e. to the period following St. Patrick and St. Finian, during which the monastic churches of South Wales were the channel of intercourse between the Breton and Irish churches. This collection, according to the same authority, may date from the 7th century. The canons may have been meant for use on both sides of the Channel, and, as they are excerpta from books of the Romans and Franks, they seem to originate from the continental side, however much they may have been used in Wales. When we come to examine them, they bear every evidence of being excerpta, and we know from the excerpta of Isidore what different materials may be brought together in such a collection. There is no continuous plan or order apparently running through the whole, and certain of the canons, chiefly those related to homicide, seem to be marked off from the remainder by the payments being made throughout in ancillae and servi, whilst in most others the payments are made in libra argenti, or in libra stagni, or occasionally in solidi, unici, and scripula. The safer course may be, therefore, to treat them not as a consistent and single set of canons, but as excerpta from various sources, following the 8th century MS as most likely to be correct in its text. The excerpta relating to homicide are these. C.1. Sici homicidum et intentio commiseret. Ancillus 3. Et servos 3. Reddit et sepula anticipat. Canon 1. If anyone by intention shall have committed homicide, let him pay 3 ancillae and 3 servi and acquire safety. C. 2. si qui justitia ferit compedius, et precedente verum duris esse valert, et ipsum intentionem furit infectus. Ancillus tu, et servus tu, ready debere praecipimus. Quod sic manum et pedum vel quimibet membrum perdederit similiter duis partes preti zinovidit exceptorum. Canon 2. If anyone, being brought to justice, tries to resist the arrest and is slain in the attempt, we declare that 2 ancillae and 2 servi shall be given for him. But if he loses a hand or a foot or any limb, let him likewise know that he shall accept 2/3 of the price. C3. Si qui homicidi causa ferit suspicita, et non et timulus comprandi. 40 and 8 viris nomitatis, et quibus 24. In ecclesia jurant eam esse veterum. 6 in a causa dissequitat. Quasti non jurivat. Ancillus 3, et servus 3, reddit et seculatum anticipat. Canon 3. If anyone shall be suspected of homicide, but there are not means of proof, titulus comprandi. 48 men have been named, of whom 24 shall swear in a church that he is right, Frederic, so he shall depart innocent, sine causa. But if they, shall not have sworn, he shall pay 3 ancillae and 3 servi and be free. C4. Si servus ingentilum occiderit et culpa ingeni ferit hoc, defusta aut dextrale, et dubio ut de cotello ferit interruptus, ipsi homicida parentibus tratador, et quidquid faciendi volerent habeant potestatem. Canon 4. If a slave shall kill a freeman, and it shall be the fault of the freeman, and he shall have been slain by a cudgel or a hatchet or a knife, the homicide himself shall be handed over to the parents, and they shall have power to do what they like with him. C5. Si quis dominus servum arma portare permissit et ingenium hominem occiderit, ipsum et alium juxta denoverit retatorum. Canon 5. If any master permits his slave to carry arms and he kills a freeman, let him know that he must hand over the slave himself and another likewise. C6. Si quis ingenius servum alteris sine culpa occiderit, servus tuus domino, quod si culpa ferit servi alias servus domino reformator. Canon 6. If a freeman shall kill the slave of another without fault of the slave, he shall pay 2 slaves to the master, but if it were the fault of the slave, another slave shall be restored in his place. C12. Si quis homicidium fericit et fugam pesiet, parentes ipsium habeant spacium intra dies 15, et ut patern restaurat et securi esseriet, aut ipsi de patria vadant, post hoc si ipsi interruptor venia voleretit, redet medium quod restat et vita securus, quod si interim auxius ferit, mancipium et qui exeperant facient restaurati. Canon 12. If anyone shall have done homicide and shall have sought flight, his parenti shall have the space of 15 days, in order either to make their share of restitution and remain safe, or themselves quit the country. After this, if the slayer himself wants to return, he shall pay the remaining half and be safe. But if, in the meanwhile, he shall be slain, they shall cause the slaves, and whatever they had, received to be restored. Here, apparently, is a fairly complete and consistent set of canons relating to homicide. All the payments are to be made in ancillae and servi, and the payment for intentional homicide is apparently a fixed payment of 3 ancillae and 3 servi, i.e., 6 slaves in all. Canons 1 and 2 are consistent and conclusive on this point. Now, looking at these canons alone, two facts point very strongly to an Irish rather than a Welsh connection. Or perhaps we ought to say, to a Goidelic rather than a Cymric connection. In the Seebohm laws, as we have seen, the payments are made in cumals or ancillary, and the fixed vergeld or curb deer is strictly speaking 6 ancillary, and 1 added for a special object, making 7 cumals in all. If the Cymric codes, on the other hand, the galanus is paid in cows and never in ancillary, and the amount of the galanus is graduated according to rank, that of the lowest and youngest tribesmen being 60 cows, nearly 3 times as great as 6 ancillary, and servy of these canons. The force of these suggestions of Irish connection is greatly increased by the fact that nowhere else in the collections of canons and penitentials, except in these so-called canons felici and the canons hibernienses, in closely allied sources, do we find the payments expressed in ancillary, and it must be remembered that the intimacy between Breton and Cornish saints was mainly with South Wales, and through South Wales with Ireland, and further that South Wales, until conquered by Melgum, was Goidelic rather than Cymric. But whether the payment for homicide in the canon felici by the Kirkdir of the Brehon laws, or not, if we may recognize in these rules as to homicide the customs current in some degree on both sides of the Channel, let us say from the 5th to the 7th century, we cannot also fail to recognize in them evidence of influences at work, which have broken away partly from tribal usage, and which hail not from the primitive tribal instincts of Irish or Gaelic tribes, but from the side of Roman and ecclesiastical law, to which the districts alluded to had long been subject. We shall see more and more how foreign in tribal instinct to the solidarity of the kindred, and the consequent obligation on the whole kindred for the whole composition for homicide, were to Roman law and Christian feeling, and how soon under these influences the disintegrating process began in Gallo-Roman districts, causing the solidarity of the kindred to give way. The solidarity of the kindred is partly recognized in these canons, but it is also partly ignored. The 12th canon states, as we have seen, that if the murderer had taken flight, his parentes had 15 days allowed either to pay part and be secure, or themselves leave the country. What part? The clause states that if the murderer wished to return from his exile, he might pay the half that remained, and thereafter live secure, so that it would seem that the kindred are only liable to pay half, instead of the whole kirkdir, of 6 ancillary and servy. If, in the meantime, the murderer was killed, presumably by the parentes of the slain, the slaves, or whatever else has been received by the parentes of the slain, from the parentes of the slayer, had to be restored to the latter, the feud having been satisfied by his death at their hands. In the Brehon laws, as in the Cymric codes, the solidarity of the kindred was complete. As we have seen under Irish custom, the whole kindred of the 4 nearest hearths were liable for the payment of the kirkdira for unnecessary homicide, but the fact that the payment of vergels was foreign to Roman law, combined with the claim of the Church to protect from death criminals taking refuge at the altar, had no doubt in northern Gaul, as we shall find was the case in southern Gaul also, already begun to break up to some extent the tribal solidarity on which joint liability for the payment of vergels was based. Those criminals who claimed protection at the altar were, under Gallic ecclesiastical usage, as we shall see, saved from death, but at the same time handed over as slaves to the parentes of the slain, and it is not difficult to detect the lines of thought leading to this result. In the penitentials attributed to St. Finian, the spirit in which the missionary churches of Brittany, Wales, and Ireland, from their clerical point of view, dealt with crime very clearly appears. A layman, in addition to making composition to the injured person, should also do penance, but a cleric who possessed no property of his own could not pay the composition. What, then, was he to do in a case of homicide? The penitential lays down the rule. If any cleric kills his neighbor, he must undergo 10 years banishment with 7 years penance. If after 10 years he has acted rightly and is approved by the testimony of the abbot or priest, let him be received back into his country and let him satisfy the friends of him whom he has killed. Let him return to the father or mother of the slain if alive, saying, Behold, I, as for your son, will do whatsoever you tell me. If he does not rightly do this, he is not to be received in aeternum. Then, in S53 is added, if anyone will propose better rules, we will accept and follow them. To sum up the evidence of the canons, we can hardly claim to have done more than to have connected the Crypteer of the Brehon laws with the Pretium Homines of St. Patrick, and with the Pretium Sanguinis of the Canon Hibernenses, and with the clauses relating to homicide excerpted by the compiler of the so-called Canons Velici from the books of the Romans and Franks. The connection, though traceable only through ecclesiastical channels, seems to establish a continuity as regards the fixed payment for homicide between the Breton and Irish churches, and possibly the churches of the Gaelic portion of South Wales of the 5th and 6th centuries. If it were suggested that the Pretium Homines of 7 Ansley might be an ecclesiastical invention originating with the missionary churches of the Maricom districts of Gaul, we should still have to inquire why these churches differed so much from other Gallic churches. Everywhere else the church, finding it impossible to get rid of deep-rooted custom, seems to have made compacts with the secular power, adopting the customary system of vergels prevalent in each of the conquered and converted tribes, and giving to the several grades in the ecclesiastical hierarchy graduated vergels, placing them on a level with corresponding classes of tribesmen or laymen. Even in these Celtic cantons, the clerical instinct, whilst apparently adopting the fixed vergeld, or Crypteer for laymen, claimed to the clergy a graduated vergeld. The bishop, as we have seen according to the canons, claimed a 7-fold presium hominis, 7 times the price of 7 anseli, because of his rank in the clerical hierarchy. He claimed, too, the honor price of 7 anseli, the same as that of the Irish chieftain of a district for breach of his protection or precinct. The bishop seems to place himself here, as elsewhere in these matters, on a level with the secular prince or even with the king. And again, if St. Patrick, in his Confessions, a work the authenticity of which is generally accepted, could use, as he did, the presium hominis as a well-known unit of payment, it would seem that at least as early as the end of the 5th century, the value of the presium hominis as a unit of payment was perfectly well understood, and this in itself is proof of further antiquity. The redeeming of baptized captives from slavery was moreover a recognized method of increasing the number of converts to the Christian faith. In his equally authentic epistle to the subjects of Coroticus, St. Patrick speaks of the Roman and Gallic custom of Christians to send holy and fit men to the Franks and other nations with so many thousands of solidi for redeeming baptized captives, while Coroticus was killing and selling captives to a foreign people ignorant of God. Mr. Whitley Stokes, in editing this letter, suggests that this passage points to a date before the conversion of the Franks, A.D. 496. The traffic in captives and slaves and their sale perhaps into a still pagan corner of France accords with the strangely local use of the ancilla as the unit of payment as well as in the canons as in the Brehon laws. What, then, are we to make of this fixed vergeld of 7 anseli? So far, we find it prevalent only in Ireland and in the Gaelic or non-Cymric districts of South Wales and Brittany, and the evidence seems to carry it back to the 5th century. 7. The vergeld of ancient Gallic custom, the evidence of Caesar. There seems to be left but one possible further source of evidence as regards the vergelds of the Gallic tribes before the Roman conquest, viz. that of Caesar. Speaking of the Druids, his words are these. illi rebus divinis interessunt, sacrificia publica approbata procurant, religionis interpretantur, ad eos magnus adolescentiam numerus disciplini causa concurrit, monoc sunt apud eos honore, nam feri de omnes controversis, publis privatus constituent, et si quod et admissium facitus si deheritati, si definibus controversia est, idiom discernit, prunium pernasci constituent. There is certainly nothing in these words, when carefully considered, which indicates in the slightest degree whether the Gallic Vergeld was fixed or graduated according to rank. They amount to this: the Druids have cognizance of nearly all public and private controversies, and if any crime has been committed, if a murder has been done, if concerning inheritance, if concerning boundaries there is controversy, it is they who decide, and they fix the compensation and penalties. On the occasion of any murder committed, there would be plenty of room for controversy whether the Vergeld were fixed or graduated according to rank, or even, as it is quite possible, left open to the judgment of the Druids, so that we gain nothing from Caesar's evidence on this particular point. Further than that, the penalties for slaying were within the jurisdiction of the Druids. It may, however, be well to notice that this passage has been the subject of controversy upon another point of interest to this inquiry, viz., on the question whether the evidence of Caesar should be taken as in favor of the theory of the communistic ownership of land in Gaul, or that of individual ownership. M. Fustel de Colangis has argued with great force that the statement of Caesar that the Druids were accustomed to settle controversies, whether de hereditati or de finibus, implies that in his view there must have been something like private property, whether of individuals or of families. Now, if a connection may be traced between the liability of the whole kindred with Vergeld and the occupation of land by kindreds, with lesser divisions into something like wellies, then, without pressing the point too far, without suggesting that the Welsh or the Irish form of tribal occupation of land may have been exactly that which in Caesar's time prevailed in Gaul, we may at least say that the analogy of the Welsh and Irish examples would lead us, from a tribal point of view, to judge that the form of land occupation in Gaul was not likely to be either absolute individual or absolute communal ownership, and as under Welsh and Irish tribal custom and forms of land, occupation there was plenty of room for public and private controversies, both de hereditati and de finibus. It may fairly be suggested that some form of tribal land occupation would at least be more consistent with what Caesar recorded in the few sentences under review than either complete individual or complete communal ownership would be. But passing from the passages already quoted to Caesar's further statements relating to the Druids, light seems to pour from them into another matter otherwise very difficult to realize. It is at first with something like amazement that we view the arrogance of the pretension of the missionary priests of the Christian Church to impose what must have been galling penances upon chieftains and tribesmen who had committed crimes of murder or incest. Still more surprised might well be that they had any chance of securing obedience. The evidence of Gildas and of the Cattic records, quoted in a former volume, is sufficient to show that to a most astonishing extent even chieftains submitted to the penalties and penances imposed by priests and monks who were claiming for themselves immunity from secular services and payments. The very fact that the ecclesiastical canons contain the rules we have examined as to the payments for homicide by the kindred of the murderer seems to involve the bold claim of the Church to bring the punishment of crime within its jurisdiction. We have seen also how in these canons the right of the bishop to be placed in social rank on a level with the highest chieftains and princes and kings was already taken for granted in the corner of Gaul so closely connected with South Wales and Ireland. The statement of Caesar opens our eyes to the extent to which the earliest prevalent system of religious belief, the way was paid both for those clerical pretensions and also for the submission of chieftains and people to the penances imposed. After describing as above the prerogatives of the Druids, Caesar adds a few words to describe the nature of the sanctions by which obedience to their awards was secured. 6.8.5. Sequit aut provitas et populus eorum decreta non stetit, sacrifici interdicant. Hec pone epod eos est gravissima. Quibus ita et interdictum, he numero emporium execulorum habentur, his omnes decitant, additum sermoneque diffungiant, nequid contagione incommodi accipitat, nec his vitamvitas jus redditor, nec honus olus communicator. Whoever of them, whether a private person or a people, does not stand to the award, they interdict from the sacrifices. This penalty is with them a most heavy one. Those who come unto this interdict are looked upon as in the number of the impious and criminal. These all shun, avoiding touch or speech, lest they should be hurt by the contagion. Nor to these is justice given if they seek it, nor is any honor shared with them. Then in the passage following, Caesar describes how strongly organized was the power which the Druids represented and which they had at their back. His autem omnibus Drudibus praesit unus, qui sonum in eos habet actitatum, hoc mortuor aut, sici es reliquis excelit dignitati, succedet, aut cesunt plurus paris, suffragio druidum, non nucum, etiam armis, de principatu contatum, he certo anni tempori infinibus carnatum, qui regio totius Gallii media habitur, consident in loco consecrato, hoc omnis undic, qui controversias habent, convenient, irromque decretis judicis parent. Above all these Druids, there is one who holds the chief authority among them. To him, if dead, if there be one of the others excelling in dignity, he succeeds, or if there be many equal, by the suffrage of the Druids, sometimes even by arms, they contend for the chieftainship. At a fixed time of year they hold session in a consecrated place in the district of the Carnutes, which region is held to be the center of all Gaul. Here all, from everywhere, who have controversies, assemble and submit to their decrees and judgments. Druidis of belli abessi consuriant nec, tributa una cum reliquis pendent, Malacia vacationem omnici vivum habent immutiatum, tantis excitati premius, et sua sponte multi in disciplinium, convenient et parentibus propensquic mititor. The Druids are accustomed to keep away from war, nor do they pay tribute with other people. They have exemption from military service and a general immunity. Induced by so great advantages, many join their order both of their own accord and sent by parents and relations. It is not necessary here to follow further these familiar passages in the De Bello Gallico, or to inquire more deeply into the religion of the Gauls. It is enough that the religion or superstition of the Gauls was sufficient in itself, and sufficiently deeply believed in, to fortify the influence and power of the Druids with the necessary sanction, and to outlive the disintegration which Roman conquest, in spite of its tolerance to tribal religions, must have in degree produced. The testimony of Renan to the deep-rooted superstition of the Breton population, and the lingering presence even to this day of instincts and customs, reaching back to a stratum of indigenous ideas underlying Roman and Christian civilization, shows, as Irish and Welsh legends do also, that feelings of this kind are not subject to sudden change. And when we try to realize the position and work of the early Gallic or Breton or Cornish or Welsh or Irish churches from the 5th century onwards, we seem to see how their position and work were made possible only by the fact that what was technically called the conversion of a people to Christianity was not, after all, so great a revolution as one might at first sight have thought. The missionary, monks, or priests, it might also have been said, naturally took the place of the Druids in the minds of the people. They had power to shut out the criminal from the sacrifices of the Christian altar, just as the Druids could from theirs. The conversion, such as it was, meant at least that in the belief of the people the spiritual powers were transferred to the priest, and that the old sanctions of superstition naturally followed the transfer. Thereby was secured to the church something of the same prestige and power which had once belonged to the priests of the old religion. When it is considered how the organized and worldwide system of the church, with its center in Rome, continuing to some extent the prestige and the civilization of imperial Rome, must have appeared to the chieftains and petty kings of uncivilized tribes, it may be recognized that in this respect also, it resembled to their eyes the power of the priesthood of the old religion, with its center at Chartres, and reaching in its authority from Britain to southern Gaul. So that in this respect also, the way was paved for the church in the minds of the people. The tribes were used to the idea of a great central spiritual power, and in the church, by transfer from the old to the new religion, they found it again. End of section 10.